This is the twist on the most important story ever told, the Easter story. Now, imagine that 2000 years ago, there was a company called World Incorporated with God as the owner, the Pharisees as the executive leaders, the Sadducees as middle management, and the Herodians, who are the teachers, lower management, with the objective of reconciling all men to God. But at this time, only the Jews knew God. Then along came Jesus, who was a servant leader. Jesus was a man who traveled around his country teaching about God, performed miracles like healing sick people, calming storms, and feeding thousands of people from just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. The crowds loved Jesus, but despite how good he was at teaching, he never got promoted. At this time, the people were ruled by the Romans, who were often very nasty and forced everybody to pay lots of tax, which is money you have to pay to the government. Unsurprisingly, people didn't like the Romans, yet Jesus taught them as well about God. Many people followed Jesus, including 12 men who were his close friends and were made up of Gentiles, sinners, tax collectors, and he called them fishers of men. And when he was challenged by the leaders, he said, "You had to be inclusive in order to reach out to all men." They are known as his disciples. One spring, after teaching for 3 years, Jesus and his disciples went to the city of Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. Passover reminded the Jewish people how God cared for them a long time ago and how he had rescued them from slavery because it was a feast. There was a special meal to remember the agreement God had made with them when he rescued them as Jesus and his disciples went to Jerusalem. There was a lot of excitement. The company policy was for people to offer sacrifices to God in the temple because they believed that this paid the price for what they had done wrong. The Pharisees and Sadducees set the type of sacrifices, and this money was not always achievable by the Jewish people. But the leaders were always extravagant. So when Jesus came to Jerusalem, he didn't ride in as a mighty king on an impressive horse, as the people expected, but instead came on a gentle donkey. People cheered, but they were puzzled. The most important place in Jerusalem was the temple. It was an enormous building with a special room with a great curtain, only entered by just one person. It was thought that that was where God lived. Not now, not the temple had been treated with respect, but when Jesus went to see it, he found it had become a marketplace. It was full of noisy animals and people selling things to the poor and cheating them. Jesus spoke out saying, "You have got Lord's you have let God's house become the home of robbers," and told some people to get out. They didn't like that. Over the next few days, Jesus taught in Jerusalem. The Pharisees came and had listening sessions. Jesus told them the parable of the 2 sons. He also told them the parable of the marriage feast. The Sadducees asked him, "By what authority do you speak so much?" And he said he was the Son of God. Oh dear. Then the Herodians wanted to trip him up. They asked him in front of the people, "Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar?" And Jesus said, "Why do you test me, you hypocrites? You hypocrites, bring the tax money. Whose image and inscription is this?" They answered, "Caesar's." And he said to them, "Render unto Caesar the things of Caesar, and to God the things that are God's." Now, finally, they asked him, "What is the greatest commandment?" Or in this story, the policy. And he said, "Love God and love your neighbor as thyself." But despite all these sessions, many of the religious leaders were not happy and refused to make any changes. Rather, they wanted to get rid of him. But getting rid of Jesus wasn't easy. He was popular and Jerusalem was crowded with visitors. Then one of Jesus' disciples, a man called Judas, came to the band leaders. "If you pay me money," he said, "I will show you how to catch Jesus." They agreed to his offer. The sacrifices for Passover were made on the Friday afternoon. The evening before that, Jesus had a special meal with his 12 disciples. He took bread and wine and told everybody that they were symbols of his death. Jesus also told his friends that he would be going away, but he will send them God's Holy Spirit. "I am going to make a new arrangement between God and people," he said. His friends didn't understand what he meant. After the meal, Jesus went out with his friends to a quiet garden where he prayed about what was going to happen. As he finished praying, Judas arrived with soldiers to arrest him. Instead of staying with him, his friends ran away. Judas realized that he had made a terrible mistake, but by then it was too late. Early on the Friday morning, Jesus was brought in front of the religious leaders. They accused him of saying wrong things about God and of claiming to be God's son. Finally, Jesus told them that he was indeed God's son. That made the religious leaders angry, and they sent Jesus to the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. This can be likened to the HR department. Pontius Pilate soon decided that Jesus was innocent and should be set free. But the religious leaders in the crowd that had gathered demanded that Jesus be killed. The Roman punishment for their enemies was crucifixion, being nailed to a cross made from pieces of wood and left to die. Hoping that he could save Jesus from being crucified, Pilate had him beaten by the soldiers. It wasn't enough for the crowd. "Crucify him," they shouted, and in the end, Pilate ordered that Jesus should be put to death. Now, the story gets sad as any story can be. Jesus was taken away to a place where everyone could see him, and he was nailed to a cross. Crowds gathered around the cross, and people laughed and joked about Jesus in the cruelest way. Where were Jesus, his disciples, at this horrible time? Sadly, almost all of them had run away, but some of the women who had followed him stayed to watch what happened. As Jesus began to die, an awful darkness fell across the land. Day became night. It was as if Jesus was grabbing hold of every evil and horrible thing in the world and taking it into himself. Finally, Jesus died, and as he did, the great curtain in the temple that separated the place where God lived from everybody else was ripped apart by some invisible force. It was a sign that Jesus had made a way to God for everybody. The sacrifices in the temple were never going to be needed again. As the sun began to set, Jesus' body was taken by a friend and wrapped in cloth and taken to a private garden where he was put in a tomb that was like a cave. The tomb was closed by a big heavy stone, and soldiers stood ground to guard the tomb. Night fell. Saturday was a special day of rest when nothing was allowed to happen. It was the Sabbath. It came and went. The women who followed Jesus knew that because everything had been so rushed, Jesus' body had not been properly prepared for the grave. So early on the Sunday morning, they returned to the tomb with the special spices needed for burial. They found to their astonishment that the soldiers had gone and this tomb was empty. Looking inside, they saw that the body of Jesus was not there, but instead, neatly folded was the cloth in which Jesus had been wrapped. It all made no sense. Then they saw an angel who told them that Jesus was no longer dead, but alive. The women ran back quickly to where Jesus' disciples were hiding, and told them the news. But they found it very difficult to believe that Easter Sunday, Jesus began appearing to his disciples and followers. So, and we come to the end of the Easter story. And Jesus said to all and sundry that I am the way, the truth, and the life.